At this very moment in time, I am focusing more of my energy into publishing. However, every single one of my books incorporates what I teach. So I am spreading my knowledge in a different way. Instead of doing one-on-one coaching or group coaching, I'm essentially using the characters in my stories to coach my readers. And if they would like to see that, I hope to be able to plant a seed essentially in their lives through my books.
And I'm quite sure, absolutely sure that you're already doing that. Okay. Now, you see, you have passed through a journey, which definitely does it say, because life is a journey. In fact, life is a journey, and it's a beautiful thing, no? Now you have journey because in the process, in the beginning, you were having some challenge, which you have transformed into an opportunity for you now to serve other people. It's just like the book of Victor F. Franklin, A Man's Search for Meaning. And now you look at F. Franklin's story, and you look at the story of other people that was with him in the Holocaust situation. It wasn't a simple thing. There was no way that his life could have been cut out for him in a simple way. But just like every other person, he decided to take a step to make his life different, no? So this process of growing, I'm still looking at it again, in that what has been your most challenging moment in that have helped you to grow into what you have become today, so that you can now help other people. So I'm really interested in that growth, in that challenging moment that you have changed your life, yourself.
I definitely say that it's got to do with the self-doubt. Throughout my 20s, I almost stopped writing completely. And I now understand that the depression I faced during those years, the difficulty of just facing every day, comes from not believing in my skill and in my calling, because writing is my calling. That's proven itself very true lately. I realize now, since I made that decision to publish, and I've since written several new books, I've definitely understood that I have to write. It's just part of who I am. But I could never have had that understanding if I hadn't gone through those 10 years of doubting myself and doubting my writing and going, or having this thought that it's not worth publishing, but I'll just write for myself. Because the thing was that I didn't really write that much. And I focused on other things that didn't fill me with life the way writing does.
Thank me for that. That is really important for somebody that is trying to connect. In that, okay, the reason for the question also is to help people understand that we are talking to a human being, human being behind the story. So by looking at their normal weaknesses, their normal way of life, it helps people to understand that, okay, you too, you can pass through you might be passing through what you're passing through today, but look out, other people have done the same before. So it's not the end of the road. You can also come out of it. So now I'm trying to see, when you started to write, of course, you might have also started, I know this, by reading other people too, reading other stories and getting influenced by other people. So what would you say are the books that have influenced you the most in this particular moment in your life?
That's a lovely question. I love this question so much. Please be prepared for a long answer. So my reading journey started all because of my mom, because she fostered that love for reading in me and my sisters. And it was thanks to her that I fell in love with the fantasy genre. So when I was quite young still, we read all of the Tolkien books and moved on to the Harry Potters. Even though by the time Harry Potter came out, I was actually already reading by myself. And that was just the groundwork. But at the same time, my mom encouraged me to write to read other books like Jane Eyre and books by the other Bronte sisters. And then in school, I also got to read some of Jane Austen's works. And then my mom was like, oh, well, you should read these ones too. So I've read almost all of Jane Austen's works before finishing high school. And that definitely influenced me a lot and made me realize that I really love reading almost as much as I love writing. And I decided to do not just psychology, but psychology and English literature as a double major for my Bachelor of Arts. And that meant that I then had access to even more writers. So I actually did a course in Shakespeare and have had a wonderful background in Shakespearean writing and even earlier writing like Chaucer. Others that have influenced, definitely, as I've mentioned, Austen, but then also George Eliot, for example, who wrote Middlemarch, and some of the American writers as well, like A Portrait of a Lady. And those ones, just the historical novels really just resonate with me because I love looking at the history and how culture has changed and what life was like in the past. And that kind of combined with my love of anthropology. But in more recent years, I think, sorry, before I get there, there's one other really important thing I have to mention, and that is that my dad, being Bavarian, introduced me to some German authors, and specifically two Bavarian authors who are very, very famous in Germany. One of them is actually also internationally known. His name is Michael Ende, and he's the author of The Never-Ending Story. Now, The Never-Ending Story wasn't my favorite book by him. I have two others that I adore far more. And one of those is in German called Jim Knopf und der Lukas Lokomotivführer, which is loosely translates to Jim Button and Lucas the Locomotive Driver. That book really influenced me as a child because it's the first fantasy novel I read with an African protagonist, because Jim Button is an African boy. And that was huge for me because up until then, all the English fantasy literature that I'd read was with white people. I mean, even if you call them elves and dwarves and whatnot, their culture was very clearly Western culture. So Jim Button and the other books by Michael Ende really expanded my horizons because they were so multicultural, even though it's written by a German man, or white German man. Since then, now these last few years, I have totally fallen in love with the works of Guy Gabriel Kay. He's a contemporary of, or he wrote a little bit later than Tolkien, but he was influenced so much by Tolkien, although Kay was himself also a scholar of mythology. And he just writes so beautifully that is really something I aspire to write, be able to write like that.
Thank you so much for that. That is really in depth and it's great. It helps people to understand where you're coming from. It's really important. I'd like to ask you one question before I move back to the question of coaching business. In South Africa, tell me a little bit about the situation of literature there. Okay, I'm not saying to give me a kind of a national literary critique of the situation there, but like, how much is people involved in reading in your type of South Africa where you were growing up? How much is the culture of book really promoted in the country? Tell me about it. Go as much, as wide as you can, or as limited as you want. Just go.
Okay. I think it's quite hard to generalize because it really depends on where you're growing up and which social class you belong to and who your parents are. So for one thing, public libraries exist in South Africa, but are not frequented very much. I remember there was a news article at one point mentioning how a block of buildings burnt down and in Johannesburg, and that there was a library that had burnt down. And how a lot of people in the neighborhood went, wait, there was a library here? So you kind of understand that a lot of, yes, there is access to books, but there isn't, at least in certain areas, not a wider culture of actually reading. I think also there's a big problem that a lot of people don't recognize themselves in what they're forced to read at school. And so then they reject reading because it's not interesting or not worthwhile. I, on the other hand, was a bookworm. I mean, you would never see me without a book. Waiting between classes, I would always have a book in one hand. And I'd get moody with people for interrupting my reading because they wanted to have a conversation. So I am an introvert, and I was very different, definitely, from most of my peers. Although, yes, absolutely, the school that I attended was probably one of the environments that encouraged children to read more than other schools in South Africa. I do know that it is an issue trying to get children to read.